I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor at Gold Derby, here with Emmy winner Kiefer Sutherland. Kiefer, first things first, this is William Friedkin's swan song film. I think it's a really fitting way to honor like what a legendary filmmaker does best, which is upending expectations and going out with a bang. What are your thoughts on working with him on his last project?
Well, I wasn't focused on it, obviously, being his last project, and I was devastated that he managed to complete the film but didn't get to see the reaction to it, because I think he deserved it so much. We managed to shoot that film in 2 weeks, and I'll go into that more and more, but the only other courtroom drama I was in was A Few Good Men, and that took 3 months plus. It was such an honor to work with someone, and such an interesting kind of experience for me as an actor and as a person, to kind of see someone who had such a tactile kind of understanding of his craft. And I'll go into that in a minute, but in the whole second act I did in one take. And he set up 2 dolly tracks and about 4 or 5 other cameras. Some of them were very, very long lens cameras, and how he managed to navigate them finding kind of their way to the scene without interrupting the kind of movement and path of the other cameras was really a test of logistics that only someone who really understood what A, he wanted as a director, and B, the depth of experience to acquire the knowledge of how to do that was something amazing. But to backtrack, the film came about in a kind of an unusual way. Mr. Friedkin had just gotten my number and called me up. And I literally, for about 10 minutes, was kind of waiting, trying to figure out which of my friends was pretending he was William Friedkin, because all of my friends knew for a fact that he had made at least 3 of my top 10 films. The French Connection, The Exorcist, and To Live and Die in LA. 3 wildly different films, but I think just absolute masterpieces. And so when he was pitching me this idea of a remake of the Caine Mutiny, and I said, look, I don't want to interrupt you, but if you're asking me to do a film with you, I'm in, right? I'm in, and we'll kind of work out the rest later. And he smiled and said, okay. And then we didn't talk again for another 5 or 6 months. While he was putting the rest of the cast together, and then COVID became an issue. And so it was a process getting it up on its feet, but there was absolutely zero process in getting me to become a part of the project. He asked me if I would do it. I said, yes, that was that. And it was a very short conversation. I immediately then went and got the script, and really furiously kind of wanted to make sure that I would be able to do something. I would be able to add something. I think Humphrey Bogart gave such a beautiful and kind of still an intimate performance as Commander Queeg in the original film. And I wanted to be able to honor that, but also kind of carve out an identity for the character I was going to play as well. And I think we accomplished that. And I think respectfully, but yeah, with regards to William Friedkin, it was just a no-brainer. It was a bucket list kind of experience for me, and the danger of having a bucket list experience is that when you actually have the opportunity, they don't live up to what your fantasy is or your dream is. And this actually exceeded mine, so it was kind of one of those rare things that just got even better.
What I found so remarkable about this film, how pared back it is, it's no frills, but it's so these characters are so fully realized. I was on that ship just in my own imagination, and your portrayal of Queeg was so unexpected to me. And I just wonder, what do you think William Friedkin saw in you that made him want you to play him this time in this particular version?
I have to be honest with you, I was too scared to ask him, so I have no idea. you know, I know he was and I knew through Sherry Lansing, his wife, that he had been a fan of. I had done a film with her called Eye for an Eye. It was a very hard film for me to make because the character was so awful. But I think he saw past that as a director and thought it was a good turn. I know he liked 24. Um, I honestly don't know because I didn't ask him. I would think that I've been fortunate enough over the course of my career to have some really varied opportunities. When I think of Stand By Me and Lost Boys versus Young Guns and A Few Good Men or Flatliners and 24 versus even Designated Survivor in Touch. Those are all very different characters. So, I mean, hopefully he thought I would work very hard for him and that I would bring something to the table. And I tried very hard to do that. Um, the, the the character and the way I approached it was really in two parts, and both of them were with regards to conflict. The first testimony in the first act of Queeg's is really his conflict with the US Navy and the crew that he felt betrayed him. Very quickly, by the time he begins the second part of his testimony, after other people have testified, uh, I wanted the character to start to have a conflict within the context of himself. And by that I mean, and this is something that I believe all people have to varying degrees, but the person that we really want to be and the person that we hope we are is different than the person who we really are. And to the degree of how much varies from person to person. And with regards to Commander Queeg, as a result of his age, and I think that people as they're getting older, which is something I'm experiencing, I think they start to believe and also realize that they are less relevant than they may once have been, and less important, and frighteningly easily disposed of. And I think within those three things, you can create a perfect storm where someone is desperately holding on to an ideal of who they want to be because the other option is just simply not mattering at all. And I think that's unfortunately a part of our society. Um, and and that's just something that this character is wrestling with. And so as that pressure mounts and escalates in his testimony, as he starts to get louder and more aggressive, he's lying more and he's lying on a larger scale. And it's like a musical piece that kind of builds and builds and builds and builds and then crescendos. And then with one final note is duh, and it's over. And then he has to walk out of that courtroom a broken man.
Yeah.
And I think that unfortunately is a product of getting older and realizing that maybe you don't matter the way you thought you did or you hoped you would. And in this particular piece, we watch this man come to that realization under cross-examination and testimony.
It's so yeah, that really hit me because as Queeg was walking out of that courtroom, so small compared to
Mhm.
Jake Lacey's married, his chest is puffed out, he's finally got one up on the guy that he got rid of on this shit. I found that really heartbreaking.
Mhm.
And it also occurred to me, of course, you mentioned A Few Good Men. I felt like I just wonder if that even occurred to you personally after all these years playing that very young kind of cocky soldier compared to now. What was that like for you?
It's been pointed out to me. I have to be honest. I wish I was smart enough that it had occurred to me before I had done the film, but it had been pointed out to me, and I thought it was very astute that Lieutenant Kendrick and A Few Good Men might very easily have been Commander Queeg at a young age, right? With all that confidence in the armed services and all that confidence in himself. Um, and then just look what time does to you. And that's a very interesting idea. For me, I found it so fascinating that this piece really examines, and I didn't really get that at first, but this piece really just examines what happens to us as we become less relevant, and that's a very hard thing to deal with, and clearly we use family and all of these different parts of our lives in society to help cushion the blow. But for someone like Commander Queeg, where the Navy was his family, this is crushing. And so and again, there are very short conversations with Mr. Friedkin about what I wanted to do with the character. But as I said earlier, he's one of my favorite directors of all time. And I wanted to please him so badly. And in the first part of the first testimony, I started to realize the choices I was making were, in fact, making him happy. He was really enjoying that. And so I got to start to lean into that. And when we shot the second piece of testimony, which I think is about 45 minutes, 45 minutes, we did that in one take. And he set up those 7 cameras. And then I asked him if I could have a second take, which he was kind enough to give me, but he apparently only used the first one. But there were just technique things that I was very excited about using. And for instance, in the walking out of that courtroom, I remember consciously thinking that I needed to shorten up my stride.
Yeah.
That every ounce of energy had been pulled from this man, and that he walked out broken, and his posture was broken, and it was so exciting to do all these kinds of little tiny things that hopefully add up to a big thing. And Friedkin right away, as soon as he'd finished seeing it, he identified all of those little things, and it was so refreshing to work with someone that was that deliberate and that focused on what an actor was doing. And that's all you can ever hope for as an actor, is to have a director like that.
Yeah, actually, on that note, I was thinking that long testimony is so compelling, because it's so uncomfortable as Queeg unravels and self-destructs. I wanted him to fight back, but of course we had to go along for that ride. It reminded me of what David Fear in Rolling Stone said. And I quote, he said that Friedkin knows when to leave something alone and let Sutherland take the wheel. He recognizes great acting when he sees it. And so I wonder then, when preparing for that final testimony, it's a lot of dialogue and there's so much nuance there. That's a lot of pressure, I think.
Well, I learned it like a play. I think the real pressure was on someone like Jason Clarke, right? He's my dance partner. So it's only going to be ever as good as the two of you can dance. You know, when I watched Jack Nicholson give the "You Can't Handle the Truth" speech on the stand, that was one of the rare moments where everybody who had their day off that day came in to watch that get filmed, and I was no exception. And Jack Nicholson is so brilliant in that scene. But I think something that's often overlooked is how good Tom Cruise is in that scene.
Yeah.
Because if someone wasn't there to push Jack Nicholson's character, that character can't respond the way he does. And I had the same experience, you know, with Jason, that Jason was an extraordinary dance partner. I worked with a dear friend of mine, Beth Elliott. We learned the film like a play. I mean, I think the real frustration of doing one take for me was that I could have done 8 performances a night for the rest of the year, and I had done the work for that, but it was just going to be over in 10 minutes. But in all fairness, I had really prepared for it. And again, I like to think that I prepare for every job that I have, but I think I wanted to leave an impression on Mr. Friedkin, and I wanted to thank him for giving me the opportunity. So So we came ready to bear. Again, I can't say enough about, not only did he have cameras in the right place and capture the moments the way he did, but his attention to detail was startling. Um, and he was so incredibly articulate and astute about what he was seeing, because he was convincing me why we didn't need to do more takes. And he was explaining what he saw and what he got. And when I went back to ask for the second take, he and the editor were already putting together at the monitor. He was saying, okay, I want to stay in here for camera B, then I want to move to camera C, and da da da. And I was like, man, this guy, we didn't work long hours, but he never stopped working when we were there.
It's amazing. Truly is. Briefly, let's talk about Lance Reddick. This is his final film as well. An accomplished, respected actor gone too soon. What did you most love working with, or having him on set and working with him as well?
Well, I loved working with him. First of all, he was one of the most generous people and actors that I have ever worked with. Um, After we had done the second act, uh, he made such a point of telling me how much it moved him, and I was so grateful for that. Um, and I made a real point of telling him that when I wasn't kind of playing to Jason, I was playing the rest of it to him, hoping for some help and salvation. Um, and so that what he did, even though it was silent, was so important to me as an actor, and that his commitment in those silent moments off camera mattered to me, and absolutely shaped directions I felt like I could go. Um, the thing I'll remember the most, though, is kind of in between takes and in between scenes, was just kind of always pulling him aside, just because he's had a body of work that I've been so impressed with. And The Wire, obviously, at the beginning of his career, uh, mattered so much to me. But I had always assumed that it just took a long time for him to be discovered and found. But I realized through talking with him that he had become an actor very late in life. And so that explains so much to me, because he approaches an approach performing like that of the wonder of a young child, a young person, right? And I remember being 15 and 16 and just my eyes as big as saucers, and couldn't wait to get started, and was the most enthusiastic cheerleader. And that's really who he was. Um, and he brought that to every performance that he gave. But what I was just amazed with was, if you take a look at his character in The Wire, um, he's just so not that as a person. He's the most kind of compassionate, caring, giving, open person. I was just amazed that he smiled and laughed, because through that entire performance in The Wire, he did not.
No. And it's
Yeah.
his reaction shots, a lot of his reaction shots to what you're doing as Queeg is what really started to affect me.
Yeah.
Final question, and if you don't mind indulging us Skull Derby awards nerds, back in 2006, you finally won that Emmy for season 5 of 24. We were over the moon for that. You had your
Okay.
dad in the audience. Do you remember much from that evening?
I remember all of it.
Really?
Yeah, I remember all of it. I remember John Cassar won first as Best Director, and he had been the lead director since season 2. He had worked on season 1, but he was the lead director on season 2. So I was so thrilled for him, because that's job security, right? I mean, we're looking at it from through a very different lens, and he had earned it. And I think one of the reasons that 24 was so successful. I mean, you can point to the writing, and you can point to really an extraordinary cast, and the revolving door of actors that were coming in and out of that show were just of such a level of quality that was something very special about the show. But the directing, John Cassar was just such a huge part uh, of that show's success. So I remember being extremely thrilled for him. And then I'd been nominated since the beginning of the show, so I guess it was the 5th time, and I I wasn't expecting anything kind of really one way or another. Just always glad to kind of go to those kinds of things, because you see friends that you would not normally see because everybody's working, right? And that's a good thing. But they called my name that night, and my sister was there and a couple friends. And so I remember thinking, well, at least I've got the right company this time. This is going to work out well. And then one of the fun things that happened that evening, because you have to do a lot of press and there's a lot of responsibility if you win, that got all finished. And then the way the evening ended, one of the nicest and most historic hotels in all of Hollywood is the Bel Air Hotel, and it's tucked away in Bel Air itself, and it's stunningly beautiful. And this is before they had even remodeled the old bar. So the old bar and sitting room with the huge open fireplace hadn't been touched since 1910. And John Cassar's wife called them up at about 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock at night and said, I know it's late, but I'm married to John Cassar and he is the director of 24. And would you hold the bar open for us to come have a drink? And we haven't had a chance to celebrate yet. And they said, of course. And so we all got into cars and for anybody's edification, driven by other people. And we went to the Bel Air Hotel, where we were greeted by their maitre d' and bartender. And the bartender looked at me and took one Emmy from me because I'd won 2 that night. And he took one from John Cassar, and he'd won 2 that night. And he put both our Emmys up on the fireplace and the mantle. And he had said, in the 82 years that we've been here, we've put a lot of Academy Awards up on this mantle. These are the first 2 Emmys that have ever been put up here. And then we had a drink.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a perfect night because it felt like this very kind of fantastic night for our show, then allowed us to kind of have a night where we felt like we had entered some kind of weird vortex where we'd gone into this kind of old Hollywood lore. And so the whole thing was a fantastic evening.
Well, on that note, Kiefer, thank you so much for your time today, and congratulations on some of honestly, the best work I think that you've ever done.
Oh, well, that's so generous of you, and thank you very much. And I look forward to talking to you soon.